Signore e signori, buonasera. Benvenuti alla Casa Italiana zerilli-marimò for this event that is the last in the series Forgotten Gems. That is a spin-off of Le Conversazioni, the literary festival created, invented by Antonio Monda and Davide Azzolini that originated, as you might know, in Capri and then spread to the entire world. It's now an empire on which Antonio rules graciously. And tonight we have the fortune of having with Antonio to talk about these forgotten gems that I remind you are films that both Antonio and his guests believe that they've not received the proper deal of attention. So they repropose them to us, they show a clip, and they talk about these films. We are very, very happy about the guests that Antonio chose for tonight. And I leave to Antonio the duty and the pleasure to introduce her. Just in 2 numbers. Her first book was published in 13 languages, and she speaks 7 languages for real, not like somebody that say that, no, for real. And she's a concentrate of culture, grace, elegance, and we are fortunate enough that among these 7 languages there is Italian that we know is very, very dear to her heart. Please welcome them with a big applause. Thank you.
Buonasera, benvenuti, welcome. Buonasera a tutti. So, I'm honored and privileged to share the stage with Lila, and I'm happy to say that I love all her films, all the films that she picked. I don't know if she loves my films, but the first one is one of my favorite films of the 70s. I always believed that mid-70s is the beginning of decadence of Italian cinema, with, of course, with few exceptions. But this is one of the very last risky and poetic film. Why don't we start with the first clip, and then you will say why you love it. It's Il fiore delle Mille, notte by Pier Paolo Pasolini. I always love this scene, but I want to know, why did you pick this film and this particular scene?
Hello, it's really lovely to be here. Thank you so much to Antonio Monda, and to NYU, and to Stefano Albertini, of course, for having us here. I love this movie, all the trilogy. If you haven't seen it, I really recommend to see the whole trilogy, which is called the Trilogy of Life. And it starts with the Decameron, which is extraordinary also. I really love the Decameron. And in part, it's about the life of Giotto. And this one, and there's the Canterbury Tales. And I'd always loved the fact that it's called, he called it the Trilogy of Life. He made them a couple of years apart in the late 70s. This was the last one, and then he died in 1975. And he said that he wasn't, so he was a Marxist, of course, and but also a Christian. And he said that he wasn't so much interested in the romance and the exoticism, but more in the existential aspect of a lot of the tales. What's more interesting for me is really the encasing. He manages to do something very literary with the film, which is it's one tale that spins another, but it could be a dream, and then one character that comes out of a tale and begins another tale. And he begins the film with a magnificent quote where he says, "La verità non è una sola, ma è multiple." And so again. And he's both playing. I like in Pasolini that form of mysticism where he denies the fact that there's only one truth, but that this same truth can be found in many different tales, in many different narratives. And one of my enduring interests in literature, in art, certainly in cinema, is a depiction of desire. And so I feel one of the beautiful things about I saw it when I was maybe in my early 20s in Rome, actually, one summer, and. It feels for me, this movie always felt like it was almost a time, you can hear them, there are some Muslim prayers at funerals and whatnot, but it felt like Pasolini's dream through the 1001 Nights. of a prelapsarian version of the world, sort of a version before sin, before the Garden of Eden, almost, or in a Garden of Eden actually, before the original sin. And I thought that was incredible. And then I'll say another thing after you've spoken.
First of all, I love that you pointed at me when you mentioned the Christianity. And there are two things that I want to say. First of all, Pasolini never learned to be a good filmmaker, but he was much more. He was a poet of the screen. When he did Accatone, his first film, after 2 days of shooting, his cinematographer was still the same, Tonino Dellicoli, a legendary cinematographer. He was the DP also for Sergio Leone, occasionally also for Fellini. Called Pasolini. I say, if you shoot like this, when you go in the editing room, you don't know what to do it because it's a disaster. And his response was a poem. And he wrote, I'll say in Italian, muovi Tonino quel carrello contro natura. Please, Tonino, move that track against nature. Who cares if it doesn't work? He was looking for something different. Even here, the acting is not good. It's far from being good, but it's marvelous. The second thing is I found a quote. Now we have two options. Either I read in Italian and ask my friend Stefano to translate. And can I? That answer also the Catholicism the communism of Pasolini. Io sono comunista e nella vita sono insieme con gli operai che lottano per la loro libertà e i loro diritti. Però non posso per questo rinunciare alla mia libertà e al mio diritto di raccontare fiabe.
I'm a communist, and in my life, I am at the same time with factory workers that fight for their freedom and for their rights, but I cannot, for this, renounce to my freedom and to my right to tell stories.
La seconda parte, e poi dice, e raccontando le mie libere fiabe, non voglio scandalizzare solo i piccolo borghesi, ma anche i piccolo borghesi comunisti. I giovani che disapprovano da sinistra il sesso e la gioia di vivere sono figli dei vecchi che li disapprovano da destra. Bisogna avere la libertà di raccontare storie politiche, non l'obbligo di raccontare storie politiche.
E quella parte? Sì. And telling my free fairy tales, I do not want to scandalize only the petit bourgeois, but also the communist petit bourgeois. The young people that disapprove from the left, sex and the joie de vivre, are the children of the old that disapprove of the same things from the right. We must have the freedom to tell political stories, but not an obligation to tell political stories.
Non potei essere più d'accordo. Io non sono mai stato un comunista, ma mi ritrovo completamente in quello che ha detto. No, grazie. Quello che ha detto Pasolini. Tu ami in generale Pasolini o solo questa serie?
Tantissimo. I love and
I'm sorry, I ask if you love.
Sorry.
You love Pasolini in general.
Yes, I love Pasolini. I've always been very fond of this and the Decameron. In the Decameron, at the very end, I always felt it was, again, an almost Marxist, and very poetic sentence. He says, perché, he says, there's a wonderful tableau vivant with Silvana Mangano, who plays the Virgin, and all the operai, all the workers are in the scene, and they constitute the work of art. And he says, perché creare un'opera d'arte quando è ancora più bello sognarla? Why create a work of art when it's even more beautiful to dream it? So this possibility of dream, this fluidity, and really what an ode to life. And what's magnificent in this scene, what happens is that really this Aziz has a fiance really called Aziza, and then he sees this very beautiful woman with whom he falls in love under a moonlight, a crescent moon, and completely forgets about Aziza, who transforms into a sort of a saintly figure, right? Both a saint and a martyr. And she gives him she interprets for him what the other woman, the very beautiful woman we see in the nude, she's later called in the movie like Beruda la pazza, so she's as a crazy woman. But he falls for her, and what's interesting is that, as in many instances of desire, both in literature as in cinema, the desire of Aziz is mediated through his wife to be, his fiance, who interprets the strange signs. He falls in love with this woman just because she puts her fingers in her mouth and then she goes like this in the middle of her breast and she does something strange. So he has no idea what it means. And he goes to the fiance and says, what do you think it means? And the fiance says, it means that you say you are for her the nourishment of the body, of the soul for the body, and she will want to see you in 2 days. So the whole story is really spun by the fiance as the mediator, and Aziz keeps on going back to the fiance to understand what the lover wants, which eventually, as a martyr, kills the fiance completely. And this triangulation continues, and I found it very, very beautiful that you never, as Deleuze said, you never desire alone, but you're always desiring an ensemble, right? And this entire film is this explosion of joy, of life, of liberty, of transformation, and also, again, sort of in the Marxist Catholic vein, there's also the sense that even in the meanest, smallest, poorest life, there's always a romantic possibility, and I think he's very interested in that. Romance and desire, and the only annoying thing about this movie is that they're laughing continually. I don't know if you've seen it recently, but they all say, Aziza, always in the same vein. It's you're like, how many people are going to laugh in that way? But clearly it's a choice, and it's on the side of joy, and it's very bold, and it's very strange, but somehow it was also filmed in Iran, where I am from. It was filmed in Iran, in Nepal, in Yemen, in Ethiopia. So really unusual places to travel that far, and to use sometimes local actors and so on. So I found even set, in terms of the set, it's quite magical, and it was...
the city of Sana'a is where...
Sorry?
The city of Sana'a in Yemen, I think.
Yes, exactly. And it was Dante Ferretti who did that, and it's magnificently set, so I really recommend it.
One more question about Pasolini. Do you admire also his work as a poet, novelist, intellectual, pamphletist?
I do. I think he's a total artist, and maybe you like him less as a writer. I think we had...
No, I think he was a good poet, not a good novelist. But
right. I haven't read his novels. I've read only his poetry. Also, didn't he write some in Friulano?
Sí, he was from there. Exactly, he was from Casas, I think was his hometown. Yeah.
So no, and I like his face also. I like what he, I don't know. I'm a sort of rogue Christian myself, and I like the rogue. I really identify with the rogue Christian in him very much. And I find one of the most beautiful things also spiritually in this movie is that you have many strangely saintly figures, right, who make these pronouncements, and then transformation occurs. But it's really between magic and a very real spirituality, I think.
Exactly what you say now leads us to my first choice, which is a film by Ermanno Olmi, one of the great Italian poets of the screen. And the title is The Legend of the Holy Drinker. It won the Golden Lion in Venice in 1988. I don't know if you're familiar, it's based on a Joseph Roth novella. Let's watch. The film follows almost verbatim the story of Joseph Roth. It's about this man played by Rutger Hauer, you remember, as a replicant in Blade Runner. And it's a great idea of casting because he plays an holy man, very saintly, not an evil creature, as he usually does, who meets a strange, mysterious rich man who loans him some money and save him from alcoholism. And he says, but one day you must bring back the same amount of money to the statue of Saint Therese of Lisieux and this cathedral. And what happens is that every time he tries to go and leave the money, something happens, and he cannot, accomplish what is promised. But the story is that he realized that he did much more, helping other people. So it's a story about sanctity, where you immediately recognize the author, Joseph Roth, who suffered of alcoholism and converted to Catholicism, actually. I don't know if you're familiar with Olmi's work, and what is your reaction to this film?
Yeah, I thought it was very beautiful, and I immediately thought also of sort of rogue, what I would call rogue Christianity, where you could see that something holy and mystical is happening, albeit on the side in a way that's almost uncouth, and I really love that. It also made me think of a Persian proverb where, in connection to what you say in Persian, "Cheraghi ke be khone ravas be masjid haram ast," which means the light that is missing at home is wasted on the mosque. So exactly meaning that if others need it, it's
This is
better.
what this film is about.
Exactly, it's better to help them rather than to run to the mosque and have to give it. Exactly what you just said. So no, and I love it's also very difficult to film a service like that. And I love the effect of chiaroscuro and the illumined Virgin. It's an extraordinary scene.
And it's interesting because Olmi, this is an exception in Olmi's career because it's relatively a decent budget. He generally used to make very low budget film using his family as a crew member. For example, the cinematographer was his son, Fabio. But you see, the quality is quite high. And he demonstrated that you can make great films with little money. And the film was produced by Roberto Cicuto, later, who is now, no, actually until a month ago, was the president of Biennale in Venice. He became an institution in Italy. And relaunched Olmi career was sort of fading because he won in Venice and he was able to make 5 other films.
And you think he's one of the best filmmakers?
I think not only is one of his best films, but I think it's one of the great Italian filmmakers. I see some of my students here of Italian cinema, we watch Il Posto, which I think is a masterpiece, together with this one and Il Mestiere delle Armi, which I show with Michael. Let's go now to your second choice, which is a completely different film. I will not say what is it, but you want to say?
It's called La Ley del Deseo, The Law of Desire by Pedro Almodóvar from 1987. And yes, we're entering a completely different planet.
I'm happy that you picked this one because it's one of my favorite Almodóvar films.
Yeah,
And I want to know why this one. I don't know if Michael Barker is in the audience. We owe him this film and all the Almodóvar films that were distributed in this country. I don't know if he's here, but why this one?
First, I have a feeling that Almodóvar might not have made this if Pasolini hadn't existed before also. And it's a, I saw this when I was 15 and it really opened a whole new world for me. I think it changed my relationship to many things, to Spain, but also to desire. I came from a quite conservative background. And all of a sudden, happening upon this film, and again, the joyousness, the liberty, the complete openness, something that we forgot to talk about in the other movies also, how much Pasolini gives place also to women and their desire. Everybody's not just the men who are after the women are continually and quite aggressively after the men. And here, it's also the same kind, what I think connects the two. There's almost, it's of course the Movida, it's right after Franco, it's when Madrid and Spain got completely liberated, and I think he transformed what Spain was, and he transformed our notion of the country, but he also transformed something in cinema. I've seen all of his movies. I think this is his best one. Maybe I also really love Tacones Lejanos, High Heels.
I like Habla con ella.
La Con ella is very beautiful, and I also really love All About My Mother. And here there's Pablo Quintero, who's a famous playwright, is in love with the young man Juan, who's not in love with him. And again, it's a triangle, just like in the other movie and in all of literature. And again, it's mediated because this Antonio. So this is Antonio Banderas in the best films of his life, directed by Almodóvar. He was extraordinary. He always plays like slightly cuckoo, obsessive young lovers, mostly gay, not always. And here he's madly in love with Pablo Quintero. He becomes obsessed with Pablo Quintero, the playwright that you see, who's extremely successful.
Don't say the Anto.
I won't. I won't. But the last scene, if you haven't seen it, for me, it's one of my favorite films in all of cinema. I love it. I think the soundtrack is amazing. And again, it's beautifully subversive in many ways. You see Carmen Maura, the actress, kissing the playwright. She's actually, used to be his brother. She's now his sister. So, he was doing all these things that are, we're now thinking about 50 years before anybody was doing them, and they kiss on the mouth. I mean, again, there's this almost prelapsarian air, and what I love is again this triangulation where a part of Antonio Banderas' love for the playwright is because he's involved with somebody else. But again, like in A Midsummer Night's Dream, the Juan is actually more interested in women. He's also interested in men, but he's not really in love with Pablo. So he tells him, I know you're not in love with me, but I'm so in love with you. And again, this is the trope, right? And you saw the very last scene, the way that the bodies are shown, the way for me it was and it was, as a 15-year-old who came from a completely different background, it made me it made me enter this world in a way where I felt I had a part in it. And I wasn't a gay man in Madrid in the 80s, but somehow it helped me have a place there, and it changed me, I think, politically and sexually to a degree.
I'm happy that you picked this one, and in particular this scene, because it shows what I think Almodovar really is, because there is a great misunderstanding. He's a tragic director. He makes tragedies. Under the Surface, which is pop, he uses here Jacques Brel, sung by Maisa Matarazzo. In another scene, you have Fred Buscaglione, Guarda che luna, and all these colors, all this vibrant energy of the movida. Actually, stories are quite tragic. And here, he doesn't hide it too much. And when he does it so clearly, so honestly, I think he's a great filmmaker. And he has also a unique style. I mean, now we have seen it, but...
And really, there's a whole scene in the movie where this woman is reciting La Voz Humana, the Cocteau play, and it's extraordinary, including this adaptation of L'Avion, Ne me quitte pas de Jacques Brel song. It's so beautiful. Yeah. And to me, more than tragic, there's this melancholy of desire always, this sort of really melancholy in the Greek sense, or sort of with its darkness and its longing. And he manages to create these really aesthetically beautiful scenes, but also with a lot of kitsch, with a lot of parody, but a lot of freedom. I mean, there's a magnificent scene at the beginning of The Law of Desire where Carmen Mara is very hot because it's a very hot summer, and she's sprayed by the firing trucks. Like, only in Madrid in the 80s could you shoot a scene like that. She says, ay, que gustazo. No, and she's amazed, she's unforgettable. And I just love it. It's really one of the films of my life, and I think about it all the time, and I just want to live in there for a few days if I can.
You know that he's shooting now in New York, Almodovar, his first
What
English language film. I don't know. I know it's an English language film, I think with Julianne Moore. Now where we talk, yeah.
You remember correctly, one of the narrative devices is that he writes a batch of letters to himself, and he asks his lover to send him the letter.
No, exactly. It's like taking...
Isn't that something that we would all love to receive?
No, you're absolutely right. He does write the letters because he's insane, and he wants to force this character to be in love with him, which of course can never happen. And the more he forced, the less. And he really, until the very last scene, which is both so tragical and comical and sort of marvelously romantic in this sort of madcap way. Really, I recommend this movie and the last scene, and then it's a magnificent track by Los Caballeros, the Mexican band, and there's a song called Lo Dudo, and which Antonio Banderas sings for Pablo Quintero. But you have to see it.
There is another element that makes this film superior. He loves all his characters. He's a humanist. He really loves them. He doesn't judge them.
It's true, and you can see it even in the girl to whom he says, I don't like making movies. I don't like watching my own movies. I just like making them, and even she has a place. You're absolutely right. And Victoria Abril makes a little cameo here. All the future muses, and I think he was at his best during the '80s in Atame and all these very sexually, free-flowing movies. When he became more of a drama, sort of melodrama, he became much weaker, I think.
I agree.
This is just also pure joy.
Let's go now to my second choice, another Italian film by a quite forgotten unsung heroes. The title is Lamerica by Gianni Amelio, 1994. I don't know if you're familiar with this film. It was made in 1994 after the great success of Il Lato di Bambini and Open Doors, based on a Leonardo Sciascia novel. It was presented in Venice. It didn't win any prize, but I think it's one of the best Italian films of the 90s. And it's about this young man played by Enrico Loverso who goes to Albania to join a crook, a thief, who is trying to exploit the desperation of all these people. He is sent to jail and then is freed, but is forced to go back to Italy in this ship with all these immigrants. And among them, there is this old man who believes that he's going to America. Since he's illiterate, he says Lamerica without the apostrophe. I think it's incredible how timely, even today, is this film. I mean, you change the immigration, no longer Albanians, but people from Senegal or Cameroon or Chad or Central Africa. And it's another humanist approach. He loves these people. And I think when he kills his ideology that sometimes appears in the surface of his films, Amelio is one of the great Italian filmmakers. Did you know this film?
I don't know it, but I was very struck by. Yeah, this is the third time I'm seeing the excerpt, and it's really the quality of the portrait. There's like paintings, one after the other. They're extremely moving. You see both the fear and the longing.
And the idea of the old man who says, "Wake me up, I want to be up." I mean, I want to see when we enter the harbor of New York. It's quite heartbreaking.
It's extremely beautiful. To me, to be honest, if I may say so, it felt like a scene from one of your books.
Oh, no,
it's
I
true.
wish.
It does.
And let me say something about Gianni Amelio. He started as assistant director for Bernardo Bertolucci, and then he directed his first film quite late for a filmmaker, in his 40s. His best films are generally adaptations, like in the case of Leonardo Sciascia, but I think this is his best film for the poetry, the intimate poetry, and once again, the love that he has for all his characters, including the crook, including that young man.
Yeah. No, you're right, and I thought exactly the same thing of the migrant boats, and I, when you look, I try to look at the faces that we see in the photographs, and you really see exactly the same gazes. It's a very, very moving. I'm going to watch this film myself.
I strongly recommend to watch this film. By the way, I want to thank Giuseppe De Lauria, who did the editing. I don't know where is Giuseppe. Thank you very much for the brilliant job. And now we'll see your third and final choice.
So it's
a French-Tunisian film.
French-Tunisian film by Abdellatif Kechiche. It's called Mektoub, My Love. Mektoub means it is written in Arabic. Canto uno. So it was the chapter 1 of what was also meant to be a trilogy. That didn't happen.
Why this film?
I think Kechiche, he had a few problems after the second installment of this film, of this trilogy, or the intended trilogy. I think he's one of the best French filmmakers, and I think he's the one who made Blue is the Warmest Color that won the Palme d'Or.
Palme d'Or in Cannes.
Yeah. And in Blue is the Warmest Color, I realized that you really need to be from I was born and raised in France, as you can probably tell by my accent, but I think only somebody that comes from the immigration can see France in this way. And there's a lot of emphasis in Blue, aside from the whole, the desire between the two women and the love affair that we all know about. It's really how he shows the importance of school, the importance of literature at school, the love of school, how one becomes both French and remains other, but becomes French through literature and through cinema. And that way of filming, what's interesting here is that nothing much happens in this film. Even in this scene, they're talking about an affair. This girl has a boyfriend called Clément, who's gone on mission. He's either in the military or he's a missionaire with the Mission Française. And she has an affair with Tony, who's the cousin of this character. So again, we have the mediation. She's confiding in him, sort of in this gossip, also confession type of conversation, and they're complaining about the woman who's just interrogated her, who's suspicious that she may be having an affair. The only sex scene of this more than 3-hour movie is at the very beginning. One of the most extraordinary scenes in the movie includes the birthing of a baby lamb by a mother lamb. And the scene is completely extraordinary. So it's always, in a way, he reminds me, and he's not at all Wong Kar-wai, but in the same way, the way he talks about love, the way he talks about desire, it's more people gliding past each other. So it's very sort of anti-Hollywood, in that nothing happens. And here, what I find really interesting in the scene you picked is that the amorous conversation begins with a confession, and slowly, of course, it becomes an amorous conversation between the two of them. And the fact that the character of Amine knows that she's been with his own cousin makes him exactly the way René Girard, the great scholar who taught at Stanford for a long time and who died a few years ago. He's a great scholar of desire. He talks about it in his book on Shakespeare called Les Feux de l'Envie, The Fires of Envy. And he shows us how in all of literature, and especially in Shakespeare's, for instance, in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, one of the gentlemen says, "I'm in love with this woman," and he shows a portrait. The other gentleman hasn't seen the woman, has never met her, but he's fallen in love with her just because his friend desires this woman whose portrait he has. And as Lacan says, we always desire the desire of others. And this is what happens in this scene. He starts to desire this woman, whom he's going to desire throughout the whole 3 hours of the movie, because the cousin desires her. So again, we desire it in ensembles. And this whole movie is just sort of gliding past each other, going for something where you realize that everything is flowing and desire is everywhere and it's labile, and at the same time it's of course it's unreachable.
You describe it so well that I don't have anything to add. But one thing about the pace, what I like about this scene is the pace. I mean, it's so slow, nothing happens, but everything happens between the characters, and which makes him a great director. Are you familiar also with the writer of the film, of the book, François Bégodeau?
Yeah, it comes from a book. It's called La Blessure, la vraie. But I haven't read it. Have you read it?
No, I haven't. Bégodeau was also adapted by another interesting French filmmaker, Laurent Cantat, in a film called The Class, which won the Palme d'Or in Cannes as well. Yeah.
No, and even the music, the way that, first of all, there's lots of, this is not in Paris, this is the character Amin has gone to medical school in Paris, he's trying to be a screenwriter, he's come back home to Sète in the south of France, so you have a lot of people with accents, but you have a lot of the immigration, which you don't see that much. Now it's changing, thank God. After 40 years, they're catching up with America. You see a few, black and brown people on the news, you see more and more, but it took them a very long time. And so also for me as an immigrant and who was born and raised in France, it was quite extraordinary to finally see these Tunisian characters, and also the fact that he allows himself to not, he does, sometimes they have accents, sometimes, but he also then he uses Mozart as backdrop, then he has the birthing of the Lamb, which is such a strong Catholic also symbol. So he's this hybrid, this also again, like this sort of, he allows himself this métissage, which in the end, I think is richer than the sum of its parts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's time for the third and final choice of mine. I will introduce it instead of commenting. Is from a David Lynch film called The Straight Story, which is quite unusual for Lynch himself, and is based on a true story about a gentleman called Straight. Straight is the last name of the guy, who is in his late 70s, and he knows that his brother is dying. So they're both farmers, very poor, and he doesn't know how to reach him because he lives in Wisconsin and the brother, I think, in Georgia. So come si chiama un trattore? So he takes his tractor and he goes with his tractor from Wisconsin to Georgia for a week. And nothing happens. And this is the final scene. I think it's one of the most moving scenes in cinema in the last 20, 25 years. Let's watch it. You ride that thing all the way to see me. Yes, I did. It's incredible. And this film denies the fact that Lynch deals only with nightmares, creepy creatures, crazy characters. This is an extraordinary film. And it's quite unique. Of course, it was not successful at all. It's a strange film. I mean, basically nothing happens for the entire film. You see only this man with his tractor.
I wanted to kill myself.
The actors are Harry Dean Stanton and Richard Farnsworth, who died a few months later. Now, since this scene is quite sad as a tradition, we close with a comic relief. It's a surprise for Lila as well. No comment, just the scene. Is by one of the giants of movie making, and at the end there will be also a slide with our next events. So let's watch it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now there is a slide with our next event. The first one will be on May 7th at New York Historical Society, the other three in Rome. I look forward to having you all. Thank you very much, Casa Italiana. Thank you, Stefano, and thank you, Lila Azam Zanganeh.
Thank you.
Thank you.